Hey y'all, we're gonna do several lectures on the integument. I'm gonna break this up into three pieces for you. So the first part, we're gonna talk a little bit about the layers of the integument. The second part, we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the cells and the physiology. And then in the third part, we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the accessory structures on the integument. So let's just start here with an image of the integument. So the integument is actually made of three layers. This outer layer is the epidermis. The middle layer right here is the dermis. And then the deepest layer here is this hypodermis, or it's also known as the subcutaneous layer. So we often think of the integument and we think of the skin. The skin is an organ. The integument is an organ system. So the skin consists of the epidermis and the dermis. So those two parts are the skin. Now, within the integument, we have a whole bunch of different structures, and I wanted to point them out. So I'm going to highlight these with the cursor, and you can follow along. So this structure right here, this is a sweat gland, which is also known as a sudoriferous gland. This secretes sweat through this tube to the surface of the skin, and that's going to be used to cool the skin. The other structure that you can see here that's very prominent is the hair. This is the hair follicle. So the hair follicle produces hair. Another structure that's associated with the hair follicle is this muscle right here. This is called the erector pili muscle. This muscle, by the way, erector pili muscle, it's spelled like this with an A. That muscle pulls the hair shaft upright. So when you get cold, it raises the hair away from your skin, it traps air against the skin, and it helps keep you warm. So that is also involved in temperature regulation. Also attached here to the hair shaft, but also just attached to the epidermis as well, you have this kind of gland here. This is an oil gland or a sudoriferous gland. So that creates oil, and in this case it's going to lubricate the hair shaft as it grows out. It's also going to produce oil that comes out on the surface of the skin, and that's going to be involved in conditioning the skin as well as helping to make it waterproof. You have a whole bunch of sensory structures in your skin. So you have this structure right here. This is called the corpuscle. You also have these things up here called free nerve endings. Those things detect touch and pain. So this corpuscle here, and there's another one here that's closer to the surface of the skin, those detect things like pressure and touch. And then the free nerve endings detect pain very specifically. You'll also notice that we have blood vessels. There's a bunch of blood vessels that run through the dermis part of the skin, and this is to deliver nutrients, but it also helps control the temperature of the body. And then the hypodermis is defined by this adipose tissue or fat. So a lot of the fat in your body is right here in the hypodermis region of the skin. So I want to go from superficial to deep and talk a little bit about these different layers. So if you look at the epidermis, you actually have two kinds of epidermis. You have what's known as thin skin, and you have what's known as thick skin. This is showing you two images of thin skin and thick skin. You definitely see the thick skin is thicker. So thin skin you find on most of your body. So your face, your arms, pretty much all over your body is thin skin. And this outer layer of skin called the stratum corneum, it's made of dead skin cells, that's relatively thin. Now thick skin you find in two places on your body. You find it on the palms of your hands, right here, and you find it on the soles of your feet. I'm not showing you those. That's where you have thick skin. And the stratum corneum, this outer layer, is much thicker in that skin. Now, the epidermis and the dermis, those two layers are actually held together by this bumpy region. So at the top of the dermis, you have this region called the papillary region. And what happens is this. So if this is the dermis and this is the epidermis, those two layers lock together like this, and those bumps keep the epidermis and the dermis locked together so they don't slide past each other. Now, I want to talk specifically about the cells in the epidermis. There's actually two main cells that we're going to talk about. One of the kinds of cells is this cell right here. So this is showing you a close-up of the layers of the epidermis. This is a keratinocyte. Now, a keratinocyte, these cells are the cells that divide in your epidermis. So these are the ones that you shed. You're constantly losing these cells. As they divide, they push up, and as the cells move up high enough, they die off, they become packed with proteins, and they're there to help protect and waterproof your skin. The other kind of cell that you have is this one that kind of looks like an octopus. This is called a melanocyte. And this cell produces pigment. And you can see it here, it actually sends these extensions out, these processes between the keratinocytes. So when you get exposed to sunlight, these cells produce melanin, and that melanin actually shades, it makes a little shade right over the nucleus, shades the nucleus from UV radiation. So this layer, the epidermis, is actually broken up into very specific layers, and I'm going to walk you through them. The outermost layer is called the stratum corneum. Now that's the thickest layer of your skin that is made of waterproof cells that are completely dead. They are filled with a protein called keratin, and you may be familiar with that protein. It's in your fingernails, it's in your hair. So this is the outermost layer. As you move deeper, you have, now this is only in thick skin. In thick skin only, you have this layer called the stratum lucidium. This is a clear layer, that's what lucidium means, found only in thick skin. As you go a little deeper still, you have another layer called the stratum granulosum. And this is where the cells start going through this process of changing. They go from living cells to dead cells. So they enter in this layer, living cells, and they slowly start to go through this process of being stuffed with proteins. The layer below that is called the stratum spinosum. So the stratum spinosum is made of these keratinocytes. They're going to be filled with melanin because the melanocytes will be adding melanin to them. And you also find these cells called Langerhans cells there. I'm not so big that you know that, but those are immune cells that you'd find in your skin. Now, the bottommost layer is called the stratum basal, base, right? That consists of cells that are actually undergoing cell division. So it's a single layer of keratinocytes, and these are the cells that actually divide and push the rest of the cells up.